My name is Dominic Stratford. I'm the Research Director at the Sterkfontein Caves. Cosmogenic nuclide burial dating is a very interesting technique, especially for cave deposits. So it works on the idea that everything on the surface of the planet receives cosmogenic radiation from space. And so as that radiation is traveling through the Earth's atmosphere, then it breaks up particles into isotopes. The same thing happens when it starts to penetrate the Earth's surface. So in rocks and things like this, and especially things like quartz, then it breaks up into two different types of isotopes. And those isotopes decay at slightly different rates. Now in caves, that's great for us because basically underground, those little particles will fall into the cave, and instead of receiving cosmogenic radiation and creating more of the isotopes, essentially those isotopes start to decay at a known rate. And so we can use the ratios of those isotopes to then say how long ago that little grain of sand or that rock fell into the cave. The hope is that those grains are around or near the fossils that we want to date, because at the moment we still can't actually date the fossils themselves. So this method is a little bit different because it tries to date the sediments that are directly associated with the actual fossil. So previous fossil sort of efforts to date the fossil have focused on trying to date things that were considered to be sort of above and below a fossil bearing unit. So what there would be is there would be maybe a speleothem or a flowstone that was over the top, and then another flowstone that was underneath one unit that contained a whole bunch of fossils. The idea is if you date the thing underneath and date the thing over the top, then you can get a maximum and minimum date for the fossils themselves. The difficulty is, especially when it comes to flowstones, that sometimes flowstones can start to work their way into cracks in the rock and into the breccia, and so only afterwards, and potentially a million years afterwards, do they actually go close to the fossils themselves. And that's where the stratigraphic work comes in. Member 4 was excavated many years ago, and it was excavated by a gentleman called Alan Hughes, who was excavating essentially under the direction of Philip Tobias. And that excavation ran from sort of the late 70s through to the early 1990s. Through that excavation, they left us these big excavation profiles, so these big vertical walls where they'd taken sediment out. And those vertical walls provide us essentially a bit of a record of the sequence of how that deposit accumulated and grew. And so the stratigraphic work focused on trying to understand the organization of all of the stones that are exposed in those profiles. And that provides us an opportunity to see where the deposit came from, and also identify which parts of the deposits may be older than others. And together with some observations from areas that are quite famous, like around Mrs. Ples, and also around to the back of the part of Member 4 that's exposed, we were able to get a slightly different but much more coherent understanding of the stratigraphy of that deposit through these kinds of analyses. So the previous dates for the hominids actually seem to be pretty good in lots of the sites. Where you have really good associations between those flowstones, and we can confidently say that those are what are called bounding flowstones between a body of fossils, then those are good. It's always worth restudying. It's always worth going back to something and restudying it and testing your hypothesis again and again and again. And that's essentially what we've done here. We've taken a hypothesis that maybe Australopithecus at Sterkfontein was dated between 2.6 and 2.15, and we tested it with a different dating technique. And that provided us an opportunity to say, wow, hang on a second, he's actually much older than we previously thought. When we did a lot of stratigraphic work around, then we became more and more confident that the flowstones are actually not associated with the fossils themselves.